Imagine two people, Sarah and Mike. They both start retirement on the exact same day, January 1st, 2025. They're both financial professionals. They've both saved exactly $1 million. They both need to withdraw $40,000 this year to live. They're both invested in the exact same index funds, and over the course of the next 20 years, their portfolios earn the exact same average annual return of 7%. You would assume, logically, that their retirement accounts would end up in the same place, that they'd both thrive. But here's the terrifying truth. 15 years from now, Mike is broke. He's run out of money and is forced to sell his house to survive. Sarah, meanwhile, has over $1.4 million left in her account and is living comfortably. How is this possible? If the returns were the same, how did one person end up financially ruined and the other succeed? Vincent retired on January 3rd, 2008. He was 62 years old. He'd spent 34 years as a civil engineer, maxing his 401k, living below his means, investing in total market index funds. His portfolio had hit $1,050,000. He'd run the calculators. At a 4% withdrawal rate, $42,000 annually, the math said he'd be fine. Safe. Made a detail. The 4% rule was gospel. He submitted his retirement papers in December 2007. His last day was January 2nd, 2008. On January 3rd, he woke up without an alarm for the first time in 34 years. He made coffee. He sat on his back porch. He felt free. 60 days later, Bear Stearns collapsed. By September, Lehman Brothers was bankrupt. By November, his portfolio had dropped 38%. He'd retired at the beginning of the worst financial crisis in 80 years. And he had no paycheck coming to save him. My name is Sterling, and I spend way too much time thinking about the invisible mathematical traps the financial world sets for hard-working people. If you're someone who believes that as long as you hit your savings number, you're safe, this is for you. Because today, I'm going to prove to you that when you retire matters more than how much you retire with. I'm going to show you the specific math behind sequence of returns risk, why it's the most brutal tax on early retirement, and how you can use a few key strategies to beat the market's time. The answer is simple, shocking, and is almost never taught in financial literacy courses. It's the hidden risk that proves averages are meaningless in retirement planning. It's called sequence of returns risk. The fundamental flaw in most retirement planning is relying on the average return. When you use a calculator, you plug in 7 or 8%, and the calculator assumes you get that return every single year, smoothing everything out, making the future feel predictable. This is a fatal assumption. Here's what most people don't realize. In retirement, the order of your returns is exponentially more important than the average. Mike retired in a bad year. His first 3 years of retirement were brutal. He started with $1 million, and after 3 years where he faced a 15% loss, followed by a 10% loss, followed by a plunged 20% gain, he was forced to sell his investments at a loss just to pay his rent and buy groceries. He was withdrawing $40,000 from a rapidly shrinking pool. This is what we call negative compounding, and it's financial poison. He sold low, guaranteeing those funds wouldn't be there to participate in the eventual recovery. Now let's look at Sarah. She was lucky. She got the exact same returns as Mike, but they were reversed. In her first 3 years, she started with a +20% gain, followed by a +10% loss, followed by a +15% loss. After the exact same 3 years of returns, she was also down. But she benefited from positive compounding early on. Her portfolio was allowed to grow quickly before she needed to make significant withdrawals. Even with the subsequent crash, she was withdrawing $40,000 from a larger pool. She'd already built a financial cushion. Crucially, the absolute average return for both Sarah and Mike over their full 20-year period is mathematically identical. But because Mike faced early losses combined with mandatory withdrawals, he entered a death spiral he could never escape. His portfolio collapsed at precisely the worst time. Sarah, with her early gains, survived the identical later losses and thrived. Vincent watched his portfolio collapse through 2008. January, $1,050,000. March, $980,000. June, $870,000. September, $720,000. December, $651,000. He'd lost $399,000 in year one, nearly 38% of his life savings. But the bills didn't stop. Property taxes, $6,200. Homeowners insurance, OPN, $800. Groceries, $450 a month. Utilities, $280 a month. Car insurance, $1,200. Gas, $180 a month. Healthcare premiums until Medicare at 65, $850 a month. Plus home maintenance, clothing, discretionary spending, and miscellaneous costs that brought his total annual expenses to roughly $42,000. He needed $42,000 to live, and his portfolio was imploding. He did what he had to do. He sold $42,000 worth of shares in December 2008. At the bottom, at the worst possible prices. He locked in losses to buy groceries and pay the electric bill. His starting balance for 2009, $609,000. He'd entered retirement with $1,050,000. 1 year later, he had $609,000. He'd lost $441,000, not because he spent it recklessly, but because he retired at precisely the wrong moment and had to sell at the worst time. This is the psychological and mathematical trap of sequence of returns risk. Your risk is not static throughout retirement. It's hyper-concentrated in the first 5 to 10 years. The problem is that most people approach risk backwards. In the accumulation phase, when you're working and saving, volatility is your friend. When the market dips, your money buys more shares. You want market crashes in your 20s and 30s, the sequence of your returns doesn't matter much then because you're constantly injecting new capital. But in the distribution phase, when you stop adding new capital and start making mandatory withdrawals, volatility is now your enemy. A crash in the first decade of retirement is catastrophic because you're selling assets at a loss, locking in that loss just to cover your monthly bills. This hyper-concentrated risk period in the first decade of retirement is what I call the danger zone. It's a 10-year window where market timing is everything, and a single bad sequence can lead to failure even if your savings calculations were perfect. You can't predict the market, but you can build a defensive structure around your danger zone. The goal is simple. Eliminate the need to sell equities during a market downturn in the first 10 years of retirement. This requires a fundamental shift in how you allocate your money leading up to and immediately following your retirement date. The bucket strategy is the single most effective way to manage sequence of returns risk, allowing you to segment your money based on its anticipated use, creating a financial barrier between your day-to-day spending and your risky long-term investments. Bucket 1, the cash moat. Hold 3 to 5 years' worth of living expenses entirely in cash or high-yield savings accounts to protect against immediate volatility. If the market crashes 30% on your first day of retirement, you simply draw from this cash for the next 3 years, leaving your stocks untouched to recover. The savings, bucket 2, the bond buffer. Hold 5 to 7 years' worth of expenses in intermediate-term bonds or fixed annuities, serving as your defense in depth. If the market hasn't recovered by the time the cash moat is empty, you liquidate some bonds instead of selling stocks at a loss. Bucket 3, the growth engine. Hold everything else in your aggressive, diversified stock portfolio, knowing this money has a 10-plus year time horizon, allowing it to survive multiple recessions and benefit fully from compounding. Every year, if the market has been positive, you simply refill the cash moat from the gains in the growth engine. If the market has crashed, you wait. You use the first two buckets to absorb the shock, giving your primary growth engine time to recover without locking in losses. Vincent had done none of this. He'd read about the 4% rule. He'd read that stocks outperform over the long term. He'd kept 100% of his portfolio in a total market index fund because the math said that was optimal. The math was right about the long term, but Vincent didn't have a long term. He had a collapsed portfolio and bills due in 30 days. If he'd held just 3 years of expenses, $126,000 in a high-yield savings account when he retired in January 2008, he could have drawn from that cash through the entire 2008-2010 crisis. His stock portfolio would have dropped 38%, but he wouldn't have sold a single share at the bottom. By 2011, when the market recovered, his stocks would have rebounded. He'd have refilled his cash bucket from the gains. He'd have survived. Instead, he sold $42,000 at the bottom in 2008. He sold another $43,000 in 2009 when the market was still down, and another $44,000 in 2010 during the slow recovery. He'd sold $129,000 worth of shares during the worst 3-year period in modern market history. Those shares never got to participate in the 2010-2020 bull market. They were gone. Beyond the bucket approach, most financial plans assume you withdraw a fixed dollar amount every year. But this is rigid and dangerous during the danger zone. You must employ a dynamic withdrawal strategy.
Portfolio is 15% in a good year. You might allow yourself a small bonus withdrawal to replenish savings or fund a large purchase.
Crucially, if your portfolio is down 15% in a bad year, you commit to cutting your spending by a fixed percentage, say 5 to 10%. For examples, they are always deeply optimizable plans, productions, costs.
But Mike could have survived if he'd cut his withdrawal in his first 2 bad years, saving his core principle.
The goal isn't starvation, it's flexibility. A small spending cut early on can save your retirement 15 years later. Vincent made his first adjustment in 2009. His portfolio had recovered to $675,000 by mid-year, after his spring withdrawal. He sat at his kitchen table with a spreadsheet and a calculator. His original plan: withdraw $42,000 annually, increase by 3% for inflation each year. By 2009, that would have meant withdrawing $43,260. His new plan: cut spending by 10% and eliminate inflation adjustments entirely for 3 years. He reset to 90% of his original $42,000 baseline. Forecourt. His new annual withdrawal: $37,800. It hurt. He canceled the vacation to see his daughter in Oregon. He stopped eating out twice a week. He started buying store-brand groceries. He drove his car an extra year instead of replacing it. But that roughly $5,000 annual reduction in withdrawals meant he sold fewer shares during the continued downturn. Those shares, when the market finally recovered in 2012-2013, were still in his portfolio. For he's so vigorous after a puzzlement diversified, they're blurriable in state. The spending cuts he made between 2009 and 2011, totaling approximately $15,000 in reduced withdrawals, protected roughly $45,000 in portfolio value over the following decade. He'd sacrificed Oregon and restaurants. Finally, the most potent defense against sequence of returns risk is creating a temporary flexible income stream during the danger zone. If Mike had worked a flexible consulting job earning even $20,000 for the first 5 years, his necessary withdrawal would have dropped drastically. mitigating the damage caused by negative compounding. This strategy is often the final piece of the coast fire puzzle. You hit your coast number, but you work a low-stress job for the first few years of withdrawal to protect your principal. Vincent went back to work in 2011. Not full-time, he couldn't stomach that, but a former colleague offered him part-time consulting work, 10 to 12 hours per week on average, $55 an hour. He worked from home, set his own schedule, and earned roughly $28,600 that year. His necessary withdrawal from the portfolio dropped from $39,000 to $10,400. His portfolio finally had room to breathe, to recover, to grow again without being constantly drained. He kept the consulting work for 4 years, 2011 through 2014. By 2015, his portfolio had recovered to $890,000. The market had roared back. His part-time income had shielded his principal during the critical recovery years. In 2015, at age 69, he retired again. This time for real. And this time, his portfolio had the breathing room to survive. 15 years after that first retirement in January 2008, Vincent sat at the same kitchen table doing math again. It was 2023. He was 77 years old. His portfolio, $1,180,000. He'd started with $1,050,000 in 2008. He'd survived the worst market crash of his lifetime in his first year of retirement. He'd made catastrophic mistakes, selling at the bottom, having no cash buffer, no bucket strategy. But he'd also made corrections. He'd cut spending when it hurt. He'd gone back to work when pride told him not to. He'd learned about sequence of returns risk the hardest way possible, by living through it. If he'd retired in 2009 instead of 2008, just 1 year later, with the exact same $1,050,000 and the exact same spending, he'd have approximately $1,850,000 today. The timing cost him roughly $670,000 in final wealth. 1 year, $670,000. That's the price of sequence of returns risk. But he'd survived, and survival, he'd learned, was the only thing that mattered. The psychological toll of this risk is immense because it happens at the moment you're supposed to be celebrating your freedom. You may feel like you did everything right, only to be crushed by bad luck in the first 5 years. But you can't let fear paralyze you. The solution isn't to save $5 million. The solution is to acknowledge the danger zone and build the proper defenses. Sequence of returns risk is not a death sentence. It's a known variable that can be managed with structure and discipline. Don't let averages lull you into a false sense of security. Embrace the buckets, adopt dynamic withdrawals, protect your danger zone with temporary income if needed, and beat the market's bad timing. My name is Sterling, and I'll see you in the next one.